Hello everyone. Video 3 in chapter 13 is designated to uncover some remarkable notes, precisely the development of morphology, the development of syntax, and the development of semantics in the process of children acquiring their first language. Before I proceed talking and describing these items that are supposed to be covered today, I'd like to remind you of the tree or the category that we put forward in the previous video. It's about the classification of the process or the stages through which a child passes through so as to acquire his or her first language. We started with the pre-language stage, and we said, of course not we personally, but the book says, it's about the pre-language stage, which included the cooking, the babbling, and one-word stage and the two-word stage. Then we moved to talk about another stage, which is the transactional one, which is the telegraphic speech, and today, which is the language stage, is going to be our concern. To start with, it is, as you see here on page 176, developing the morphology. By the time a child is 2.5 years old, which is beyond the telegraphic speech, the child starts here to incorporate some inflectional morphemes, which is about the utilization of a grammar or some grammatical functions that are about the additions or the inflections that can be used with nouns and verbs as well. It is, to start with, here we have the first and early stage here in the developing the morphology. We have the ing addition. For example, cat sitting, mommy reading book. So these are, I'm not going to say these examples are unique, because still we have what? We have two things to think of. Number one is the order, its correct order, and number two is the odd use or the omission of the is and is yes in both examples. So now still the child is not able to include or to utilize the use of verb to be in his or in her utterances. The second step in this developing morphology stage, we find a child tends to use some regular plurals like S, as you see here. For example, the child is capable of using the S with boys and cats, but this is not the whole story, because here we need to be acquainted with what is meant by overgeneralization. Now, I'm going to quote the definition of this term from the book that I very frequently recommend you to check from time to time. It is a dictionary of linguistics and phonetics by David Crystal. So now, to put a general definition to this this concept of, or the concept of overgeneralization, it's found to be a term used in language, I'm quoting here directly, a term used in language acquisition studies referring to the process whereby children extend their use of a grammatical feature to contexts beyond those found in the adult language. Now, this definition indicates that a child here at this stage is overgeneralizing the use of S plural, for example. Now, this is, of course, of different versions. We are going to be more familiar with the examples found here in the book. They are very interesting, actually. So now, the overgeneralization, let's say the use of S here, it's okay to use the S with boys and cats, right? But with some irregular plural of the noun foot, you see it should be feet, but the child is not capable of using this type of a plural. What he is able to do is to overgeneralize the S here. So instead of feet, that child might say foots, as well as instead of men, that child is supposed to use mans. And here are examples among many, of course, to resemble what is meant by overgeneralization. Overgeneralization can also include different or alternative pronunciation or different versions of pronunciation. And for example, the house, which is pluralized to be houses. So here we have what this inflection morpheme like as you see. This can also be applied to different other nouns. Let's see. So here, instead of saying boys, the child might say boyses, to include what? To include another version, or to use another version of pronunciation. Or footses, you see here, instead of saying foot, we have feet. Sometimes we have some children, they use what? Foots. Some other children may use footses to overgeneralize the use of what? Of houses, you see. So they might learn how to add the es here with its distinct pronunciation as, but the same child or a group of children may overgeneralize the use of as here to include boyses and footses instead of boys and feet. Okay, so now here another stage, some children begin using irregular plurals such as men quite appropriately for a while, you see, for a while, not always, but then try out the general rule on the forms, producing expressions like some men's. Here again, what? We have another form or version of overgeneralization. Instead of men, we have men's. 2 feets, you see, 2 feets is different versions, as we said. In a later stage within the development of morphology, children may be able to use the possessive inflection S, which can occur like girl's dog, mommy's book. So here there is another progress in the development of syntax, as you can see. Again, at about the same time, we might notice that children are able to use different forms of verb to be, like the are and was here, which they may be set at the same time with the appearance of some irregular verb conjugations. Now, let's move here the appearance of forms such as was at about the same time with went and came. Okay, should be noted. What is notable here is what they do typically precede the appearance of ed inflection. Now, what is going to be here is the overgeneralized form of the inflection ed. Let's see. Once the regular past tense forms like walked and played, these two additions, or this inflectional morpheme, the ed, is going to be overgeneralized to include different verbs, and these verbs are not as regular as you can see walk and play. Now begin appearing in child speech. The irregular forms may disappear for a while. You see, for a while, replaced by overgeneralized versions such as goed and come instead of went and came. Now this is also another version, as we said, with the ed inflection that might be added for everything, for every verb, producing some regular forms, and these are called the oddities. As we have another version like walked. Instead of walked, we have the version of walked, also wented. To limit the number of the irregular forms or versions that children may use during this stage is not that possible and easy job to do, of course, because we have, you know, a large number of children who develop their own morphology at the same time. But to include or to name the number of the irregular verbs, of course, this is not an easy job. But we have some, let's say, common uses through which we can recognize the development of the inflectional morphology at this stage of life. By the age of 4 years old, or a little bit after, This period witnesses the appearance of the S marker on third person singular present tense to indicate present, and this is also accompanied with the appearance of the auxiliaries like does and has. Now, the last paragraph in this section is very important to note. Let's see. Now, let's say, are these good forms or maybe irregular or odd forms stable or what? And what about the theory of imitation that we detailed and described the other video? Now, let's see here. This paragraph answers these two inquiries. Now, throughout this sequence, there is a great deal of variability. You see here, we have different versions. Individual children, some children may produce good forms one day. So they may use comes in its correct place on time for a minute. But later, maybe another day or another occasion, on another occasion, they may tend to use comes instead of comes. Maybe comed instead of came, sorry. Look did instead of looked. Even in the pronunciation, they may produce different versions of pronunciation. Now, this evidence suggests what? That, please pay attention to these words and to these lines, that the child is working out how to use the linguistic system, okay, while focusing on communication. So, mostly important to note is the child begins to be more communicative with and interactive with the surroundings, with the adults around him or her, than correctness. So, mostly important, the child is not able to focus on correction rather than focusing on being interactive with adults. For the child, the use of forms like goat and foods is simply a means of trying to say what he or she means during a particular stage of development. Those embarrassed parents who insist, you see, that the child didn't hear such things at home, implicitly recognizing that imitation is not the primary force in first language acquisition. Now, what is astonishing here, we have parents who insist that they never, for their children, never hear such forms like goad or foods. This gives us evidence that the theory of imitation is unsuccessful for a child to let the child, or which drags the child to imitate the speech, or let's say some utterances, sentences, maybe words that are used by adults, and those children are supposed to imitate, to use a typical perfect version of the adult speech. Of course, this is not correct. So this is again to let us believe, or let us be sure that imitation is not the correct process for a child to acquire his or her language. In developing the syntax for a child to acquire his or her first language, we can notice two important linguistic formations. They are the formation of questions and the use of negatives. Let's see further details here. We will look at the development of those structures that seem to be acquired in a regular way by most, not all, this is very important to note, English-speaking children. Now, these two stages or sub-stages of forming the questions and negative occur in 3 times. We have from 18 to 26 months, 22 to 30 months, and 24 to 40 months. Let's see further details. But it is very important to put in mind that the children as subjects to develop their own syntax stages are not going to occur at the same time. We have some exceptions. Sometimes we find a child who is able to develop the forming of the question or the question formation before the 18 months, maybe. Or maybe after the 26 months, maybe with the 30 months instead. So we put in mind that This is applicable to most English-speaking children. Not all English-speaking children. At the same time, those children that we are talking about are still having nothing wrong with their own ability to hear and to produce the language. Now, in the beginning, let's start with the forming the questions. Forming the question also occur in 3 stages. In the beginning, they are going to be able to include where as a WH question in their own question formation, and who as well. In forming questions, let me highlight these lines. The child's first stage has 2 procedures. Simply add a WH form. Still, we are talking about the first stage. The formation or the use of the where and who to the beginning of the expression or utter the expression with a rise in intonation towards the end, as in these examples. Where kitty, this is one example to illustrate the use of where. Okay. Doggy, you see here, we don't have any WH question is implied here. However, the rising in the intonation indicates a question formation. Where horse go, you see here we have missing of an auxiliary as well as the correct or the incorrect use of go here. Sit chair, so this is again in a rise in the rising or in the intonation without the use of the WH question here. This is stage 1. For stage 2, the child is going to be able to implement in his speech or her speech the use of the what and why. The what and why. Okay, so these 2 additional WH questions added to the where and who. Now, in the second stage, more complex expressions going or can be formed. Remember, we have already stated the 3 stages, 3 times through which the child is processing to form a question and negative. Now, for stage 1, as we said, between the 18 to 26 months, the child, now I'm joining the age with the stage. The first stage, from, as we said, from 18 to 20 months, the child is going to be able to implement where and who. The second stage, which is from 22 to 30 months, the child is going to be able to extra WH questions like what and why. Okay, and don't forget the rise in intonation when forming a question, like the examples in front of you: doggies, sit chair. Okay, so now more complex, again back to the second stage, more complex expressions can be formed, but the rising intonation strategy continues to be used. As I said, it is noticeable that more WH question forms such as the what and why come into use. Are the examples that you can see here. Now for the third stage, which takes place almost between the 24 to 40 months age, the child is processing or mastering a more complex movement in the development of syntax, which is the use or the implementation of the auxiliaries such as can. Now, I can have, this is okay, becomes evident in child's speech, so it comes to appear here, but doesn't automatically spread to all WH question types. Let's see what is meant here. Now, the child can use the WH question aside and can also use the can, may, will, among many auxiliaries found in English, but the join age between the WH question with the auxiliary in a form of a question cannot be a notable development in the process of acquiring the first language here. As you see, but doesn't spread automatically to all WH questions. Sometimes the child might be able to implement or to use them both, but most of the time the child within this age is not able to join between the use of WH question with the auxiliaries to form a question. In fact, some children beginning school in their 5th or 6th year may still prefer to form WH questions. Why WH questions? Because it is easy for children to use WH questions when raising questions, than or if it is compared to the use of the auxiliaries and the combination of WH questions with the auxiliaries. Now, without the type of structure found in adult speech, let's say, why Kitty can't, you see here, this is very complicated way of using question. Let me highlight it. Why Kitty can't do it. Instead, why can't Kitty do it? You see here? So here, what is the difference here? We have the improper positioning of the kitty before the can't. However, it should be why can't Kitty, not why Kitty can't, because in the grammar, grammatically speaking, we start with the, after the double H question why, we start with the auxiliary, then we move to use the subject. But what the child did here in this example, why Kitty can't do it, where he prefers or preferred, or maybe she preferred, I don't know, to use the subject before the auxiliary verb, which of course it is grammatical again. Now, again, we have different version of raising question. Did I quote it? What's happening here is that we find the child is able to use or to utilize did here in the correct place to form a question, but what is missing here is the verb conjugation, because after did there should be an infinitive or verb here. So the child at this stage is not able to recognize the correct form to be used here. Now, instead of did I catch it? Okay, so stated questions are generally quite close to adult. Let's look at this conversation between an adult and a child. Can I have a piece? This is an adult speech, and this is for maybe 5 to 6 years old child. Did I quote it? Will you help me? This is okay, an adult speech, as I said. And on the right we have what? A child question. How that opened? Of course, this is incorrect grammar. What did you do? This is okay, but for the child, why Kitty can't? Again, there is another resemblance or example to the misuse of the correct order of the position of the auxiliary that should be before the verb, before the subject.